From a show that perpetuates racist stereotypes to crossing the line with an insensitive abortion scene, these are Mayans M.C.'s most controversial moments. For those of you who don't know, the popular FX series is a spin-off of The Sons of Anarchy, and it's one of the few TV shows with Latinos making up the main cast. And while that's great for representation, Mayans M.C. has been catching flack for its depictions of Latin Americans, especially since the entire plot centers around hardened criminals. So, you know where this is going. The screen suddenly goes a little yellow when a character in a movie goes to Mexico. Did you know that most of the Mexican representation on TV or in movies shows them as criminals? True story. So is Mayans a step forward into inclusion, or is it a step backward into racial stereotypes? That's debatable. But one thing I do know is that fans aren't happy having a huge, diverse cast. That's not doing anything to tackle real-life issues. I mean, the showrunners were never trying to bring racial equality to the world, but that doesn't mean they don't have some degree of social responsibility. Kurt, the brains behind the show, said he just likes writing damaged characters. And while that's all well and fun, it still doesn't solve the ethnic dilemma at hand. Casting Latinos in a show that feeds into their own stereotypes is just wasted potential. Sutter says, the characters aren't the same as the same one-dimensional Latino villains everyone's used to. In other words, Kurt's saying that these aren't offensive depictions of Latinos and that the characters are just flawed characters. He even talked about how Sons of Anarchy featured a gang of white dudes and didn't hear a peep out of nobody. Whether his explanation makes sense or not, it does nothing to fix the situation because the show's super violent. Even if the showrunners didn't intend to depict Latinos in a negative light, it doesn't take away from the stereotype. The Latino biker gangs in Mayans M.C. settle turf wars with an arsenal of weapons, and Sutter calls the show a world that has the language of violence, and it explores these flawed characters in a brutal world. I mean, the series is so violent, you'd think that Tarantino was secretly working his magic behind the scenes, and Sutter says that's why Mayans M.C. is being targeted. According to him, every superhero flick has boatloads of violence and negative stereotypes from top to bottom, but because it's done with cool special effects, pretty lights, and lasers, people accept it. You'd think cooling his heels in prison and facing all the crap would have made Sutter smarter, but it looks like he hasn't learned a thing. Sutter says he grew up around racial slurs and fought white supremacists for 2 decades and claims he's only trying to portray similar raw human emotions in the show. For a while, his tweets and comments were flooded with replies, with some agreeing that it's okay to show the reality of violence for what it really is, while others felt it was unnecessary and excessive. Sutter's refusal to accept responsibility for the controversial content made some fans turn away from the show after a couple of seasons, but that wasn't the only reason they stopped watching. Kurt getting fired, and the reason behind his dismissal, was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was one of the most controversial behind-the-scenes moments of the show, and it came as a shock to fans. Sutter was the heart and soul of the project, and was fired after multiple complaints about his behavior toward the cast and crew. Those closest to Kurt, though, weren't surprised at all. They knew about his management style, and Kurt himself doesn't deny the fact that he's and even wears it like a badge of honor. He calls himself an abrasive person who likes working people to their absolute limit. Sutter once told an executive to crawl the heck out of his ass. Now that takes guts and a dash of creativity. Proud of his antics, he even hung a framed letter about his inappropriate behavior in his office. But ever since Kurt's departure after the 3rd season, fans have noticed a huge dip in quality, and I'm not surprised at all. No matter how harsh his language and behavior may have been, it's no secret that Sutter was the guy who could do it all. On Reddit, one fan said he couldn't get through a single episode of Season 3. That's how much things changed after Sutter's exit. More comments agreed that the show lost its touch without Kurt, and the pace and general storyline completely threw people off. One fan even went so far as to call it binge juice, and another called it a huge disappointment. Season 2 already took a hit after all the Latino representation controversy, so Kurt's departure only created more friction and caused tons of fans to leave the show in droves. At one point, Kurt's interviews and controversial statements were more talked about than the the show itself. And speaking of Sutter's interviews, he traced the root of his firing to a controversial joke he wrote into the show. A week after getting canned, Kurt went on the record to expose everything. He said he wrote a very political joke for the season 2 premiere, targeting one of the most famous and happiest corporations in the world, Disney, because Sutter said they meddled with his show's production after the Disney-Fox merger, and admitted to creating the very situation that got him forced out of the show, saying that he overestimated his value and underestimated Disney's ability to take a joke. So Kurt may have vented his anger, but they vented him right out of the show. He found the new restrictions implemented by a change in authority was too much to deal with, so he stunned people by challenging it and got a call from his lawyer. He was ordered to remove the joke. He said the executives still weren't happy with the revision of the joke and that the added scrutiny of season 3 started creating too many problems for him. It was also around this time that fans started being highly critical of the show and its new structure. And I know what you're probably thinking, hasn't the show been controversial since day one? That's true. Mayans M.C. has explored many taboo topics. From wall references to white supremacists, there's nothing we haven't seen. But when one episode talked about abortion, it was a step in a bold new direction, a ballsy move. But what was even more shocking than the actual plot was the delivery. Cartel wife Emily deals with the kidnapping of her infant son.
Please, he's just a baby.
And out of support and desperation, she turns to her ex-boyfriend and Mayan prospect EZ. But what she didn't know is that he was working with her son's kidnappers. And during an encounter, she ends up saying something super messed up when she brings up the fact that she aborted EZ's child years ago and that she did out of spite.
You made that decision for both of us. So I have to make this one.
Oh my God.
That's not where it stops, though. Emily says she did the deed deliberately to hurt him because her child being taken feels like punishment for what she did to EZ's child. And the fans weren't having it. Emily sobbing about taking a life for such petty reasons didn't sit well with anyone, as some fans were more sympathetic and felt she was desperate and needed his help, but for others, it was bullshit. And the fact that she admitted to aborting EZ's baby out of spite made her actions even worse. It's crazy how the writers were able to take such a dramatic turn in the plot and make viewers feel the intensity of the moment. I know a lot of fans were really upset by what Emily said and did, but I think that goes to show you how powerful storytelling can be. You become emotionally invested in the characters and their lives, even if you don't necessarily agree with their actions. So there you have it, from crossing the line with an insensitive abortion scene to a show that perpetuates racist stereotypes. Those were Mayans M.C.'s most controversial moments.